When most of us hear about the Ukraine war, we see headlines, maps on the news, a blur of numbers on the screen. But right now, on the ground, there are real people risking their lives and offering their skills to help.
We were in Volchansk, about 1,000 meters, so 1 kilometre from the Russian border. And the road was so bad, almost unpassable. And I was saying to them, look, I'm stuck, can you come back and tow me out? Radio started crackling and the voices started fading, and then they were gone. And I knew they were coming back.
Tenby Powell was alone in the dark. 2 elderly evacuees beside him, artillery flashes on the horizon, and then he sees headlights.
I thought, okay, this is going to be either a huge relief or a major problem. And it was a line call as to whether they were Russian or Ukrainian.
For Tenby, that night changed everything. Today, he leads one of the few remaining foreign flagged humanitarian teams still operating on the front lines. Each day they may face attack from drones, risk of landmines, and the horrors of war.
We are committed, donkey deep now, and we can't stop, and we will go to the bitter end.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of No Ordinary Monday. Thank you so much for joining us. I am your host, Chris Barron, and each week I sit down with a guest whose job is far from ordinary. We explore how they got there, what it's really like behind the scenes, and then I ask them to relive the single most unforgettable experience of their career. Now, before we dive in, just a very quick announcement. For anyone watching on YouTube, you may notice that you are now seeing my face in these intros. Hopefully, this is an improvement. If you guys have any other ideas for improving the show, just let me know in the comments below. All right, so on to this week's guest. Tenby Powell is a former soldier, business leader, and now one of the few foreign flagged humanitarians still operating deep inside Ukraine, in some of the most dangerous territory on the planet. What began as a one-off trip to go and help has turned into a 3-year frontline odyssey, where he and his team have carried out thousands of medical evacuations, delivered critical aid to hospitals under fire, and built up a network of Ukrainian partners who rely on him not just for resources, but for survival. And as you heard in that cold open, this is a real life thing that's happening now for some people. Tenby has experienced things that most of us have ever only seen in war documentaries and movies. Moments like getting stranded just a kilometre from the Russian border in the dead of night, elderly evacuees beside him, artillery flashing over the horizon, and a set of headlights approaching that could have been either rescue or capture. That night changed him, and it shaped the way that he leads his organisation KiwiCare today. From navigating the drone war that's redefined modern conflict, to protecting his teams in an environment where every humanitarian vehicle is now a target. In this episode, Tenby takes us behind the scenes of this new reality. The improvisation, the pressure, the fear, the responsibility, and ultimately the resilience of the Ukrainian people who refuse to give up. You're listening to No Ordinary Monday. Let's get to the show. All right, Tenby, warm welcome to the podcast. How you doing today, man?
Thanks very much, Chris. I really appreciate the opportunity. It's great to be here.
Oh, fantastic. Thanks so much for taking the time. I wanted to just start by sort of taking a step back and hearing a little bit about you. First of all, your origin story. I mean, you have had so many career hats in your time. You've been in the military, you've been a soldier, you've been in business, you've had to dip your toe into politics once. How do you encapsulate your career, what you've done for a living for all those years?
Well, look, it's just a real interest. I just have an interest in a lot of things and have had business success to a level that's enabled me to do this and, really do it in a way that ensures it's sustainable. And I'm not talking about self-funding, which did happen in the first instance, so much as having a network where I can reach out to people and create a vision, paint a picture of the future and how they can be a part of helping. And that's what's really worked with this. But I will say, Chris, the combination of, military and business skills has come together beautifully for this, for sure. And it is certainly it's a full-on military environment, and we work mostly in the Donetsk area, sometimes in Sumy and sometimes in Kherson. So when we're in places like Kramatorsk, Sloviansk, we were in Konstantovka last year. That's a very difficult situation now. And places like Druzhkivka, all of which are under huge pressure today. There is I do wear a military hat there, and particularly in respect of safety for our teams. And there are things that we will not do, and we're not configured to take risks. We're certainly not configured for any defensive capability. If we have to, defend ourselves, we have no ability to do that as a humanitarian organization. And so, sustainability and longevity is really important. And I use the example, we've all flown on an aircraft where you're told to put your own oxygen mask on before you put anybody else's on. And of course, the model is that if you can't help yourself, and if you're not looking after yourself, you can't look after anyone else. And so this is where we how we kind of operate. We are prepared to go right to the very limits, but we're not prepared to take stupid risks to do so. And we, as I say, we're just not configured. We don't have hardened vehicles. We certainly don't have armored vehicles. So in a military sense, we have what's called soft skin vehicles, which is just a normal ambulance or van or whatever. And we've lost 2 so far to drone attacks. And, we've still got a driver that's injured, and that reshaped everything for us. When I left Ukraine, to go back home in October, November last year, and came back in July this year, it was a completely different operating environment. The proliferation of drones had exponentiated to a level where it was unrecognizable from the environment within which I left. And so today we are seeing the Ukrainians putting up, literally hundreds of kilometers of drone nets, which is to say you drive under a road for 40, 50, 60 kilometers under a net. We've now got, electronic warfare, anti-drone capabilities in most of our vehicles. But all it does really is tell you there's something there. It can, if you've got the right level of sophisticated tech, it can blind the drone, which is to say take away its video capability. And sometimes it has other interference mechanisms, but this is very, very expensive. And this money that we would rather spend this money on humanitarian aid and medical aid particularly, rather than having to kit our vehicles out with EW equipment. And yet to not do so would be negligent. It's just a risk beyond which we're not prepared to take. So anyway, it's a very different environment. And, I would go as far as to say that we're going to see a stepped change probably every 3 months in technological advancement. And it really, it's bewildering to know where it's going to go. But as a consequence, many of the humanitarian aid agencies have stalled. Yeah. And in some respects, rightly so. I've got a bit of empathy for this. And so we and a few others, mostly private, if I can use that term, humanitarian organizations, are up front doing what we've done always under very different conditions, but very rarely today do we see the big aid agencies. I'm not saying they're not there, but it's very rare that we see them.
Wow. I mean, you're saying that the nature of warfare, has fundamentally changed, especially in the Ukraine war. And war evolves all the time. And I'm really fascinated that you had, as we mentioned before, you had a previous career in the military, and you worked in various theaters. I mean, I would love to just get a very quick snapshot of that and your thoughts on how warfare now compares to warfare back when you were doing your service as a soldier.
Well, look, I've had the privilege of leading soldiers in an international environment overseas. I've had privilege of commanding a battalion in New Zealand. And these were wonderful years. While I won't go as far as to say we could probably throw all the training doctrines out completely, we certainly do need to rewrite a tremendous amount of what we would, the manual of land warfare needs to be rewritten, and it's going to be rewritten as a consequence of the Ukraine war. And we're seeing, countries spending now, and of course the Americans have put a lot of pressure on Europe, which I'm a bit of a fan of actually, to step up and take responsibility for their own, their own defence. 5%, which I'm sure is kind of divided between 3.5% in hardware and 2.5% or 3% and 2%, say, in other things that would support that hardware, which include, roads and bridges to move heavy armor over. The reality, of course, is that we're now seeing such a proliferation of effective drone capability that it begs the question as to, how that money in modern armies will actually be spent. And will it be spent on things like armor? where a lot of the, I'm talking here about an army, particularly more than a navy and an air force, but will they be spending that amount of money on armored fighting vehicles when we've seen the huge impact and effectiveness of drones?
Yeah. I mean, we've been talking about, obviously warfare, and I guess people have been thinking that's in this sort of term of soldiers on the front line. But as you and I both know, Ukraine it's very much the civilians that are hardest hit in a lot of senses, and that's part of what you're doing there.
Yes.
And
And well, this is why. This is entirely why. When I saw that mass evacuation in February 2022, just columns of men, women, and children walking in the bleak winter. And I think the particular one that affected me was where they were crossing the Polish border. There was a child, probably a 10-year-old boy, separated from his parents, and it just broke my heart. And I thought, look, I'm going to go and do something. I didn't know what it was, to be honest, but it was just anything rather than sit here and bitch and moan and scream at the television. And so I rang a good friend of mine. He was actually a rifle company commander of mine when I was a battalion commander, who was living and married with children in Warsaw.
Mhm.
And he introduced me to an ex-British Foreign Services guy, a guy called Guy, funnily enough. And Guy Pinsent is now a very successful businessman, not just in Poland, but all over Ukraine. All over Eastern Europe, I beg your pardon. And I stayed with Guy for a while, and we kind of worked out what would be the best solution and brainstormed a few things. And, the idea was to help him with what he would call strategic fundraising, because they were moving hundreds of tons of humanitarian aid through his business. And they had, as he described it, blitzkrieg fatigue in those early days. And it was just all on for, giving support to Ukraine, trying to take in as many refugees as they could. And the Poles did incredibly well. But the inevitable happened when I was there. I got a call from an Aussie team, actually, that said, look, we down a driver, he's ill. Would you come and drive a van? And to cut a long story short, Chris, we went in. My memory is we went in for about 4 weeks. It may have been slightly longer. Warsaw to Kiev, Kiev across to Dnipro, and then across to Kharkiv, which was really gnarly in those days. It was still under artillery fire, let alone anything else. That's how close the front was way back then. Down through Zaporizhia, which was very dicey, across to Odessa, which was actually quite benign in those days, and then into Mykolaiv, which was still under artillery fire, and then circuitously back to Warsaw. In that time, the volume of humanitarian need, I just had this, as a consequence of seeing it, I just had this burning desire to start a New Zealand flagged operation, and the rest is history. And that is exactly what happened. Kiwi Care was formed within about a week, and Kiwi Care is an acronym, as you know, with a K, standing for Kiwi Aid and Refugee Evacuation. And we've just been going really full on ever since, with some very significant changes to our organizational structure across that period of time that I'm happy to talk about.
Wow, that's amazing. So you're kind of at a stage in your career where you're probably, retired or looking at a, nice retirement. And
yeah, mate, I'm way too old for this nonsense, I can assure you, but here I am anyway.
and you're sitting in New Zealand, halfway across the world from Ukraine, and you just thought, I've got to get involved. And then you got involved, essentially. You went over there, and because before that, I guess, how much experience with humanitarian work did you have?
Only on the other side, only in uniform, having to deal with humanitarian aid workers. He used to annoy me hugely on operations. I appreciated what they tried to do, but sometimes they just got in the way.
Yeah.
And I've had that hat on of not getting in the way and wanting to do effective, impactful humanitarian work without, being a burden to anybody, without doing anything, without trying to pawn stuff off onto people that they don't need. And there was a lot of that in the early days. The rubbish that came into Ukraine, a lot of which was completely unnecessary. It just became a dumping ground for the stuff that people didn't want, including, you can imagine it, tons and tons of COVID masks, silly things like that. And so as a consequence of that knowledge previously, Kiwi Care was formed with one real purpose in mind, and that is to deliver impactful humanitarian aid and support, and doing so in partnership with Ukrainians. And that's the as opposed to arriving and just starting to do stuff and taking over, as I've discovered many of the other nationalities tend to do, and having a we know best attitude, because we don't know best. We don't really know what they want, and it took a while to sift and sort. And we do know now, and I flipped. Kiwi Care was probably in the beginning 80% humanitarian, 20% medical. It's now the opposite, and has been for 2 years now, for sure.
So let me just explain that, because I guess Kiwi Care, as you said, the K stands for, was it Kiwi Aided
Kiwi Aid and Refugee
Evacuation. So
KARE.
it's essentially, from what I was reading, is you do a lot of getting ambulances into the country first, and then using them.
Can I just say quickly, ambulances are a means to an end.
Okay,
they're not the end. So yes, I bring them in, and I brought them in from New Zealand and Australia, and will continue to do so. The end is what we call Road of Life, which is one of our 3 humanitarian work streams. And we've done over 4,500 evacuations and patient transfers with our own ambulances, called Road of Life with a brand. And the others we give to frontline medical units, because they need them. And frontline hospitals, I should say, when I say medical units, with whom we've now got very close relationships with. The hospitals in Ukraine are run by a director and a head nurse. And it's the head nurse that, in my experience, pulls all the levers.
Of course.
And she tells you what she wants. She tells you when she wants it, and you better deliver.
Yeah.
And I love that. I love that about them. So they're literally under siege. And so the flipping from humanitarian to med was around, we just need tons of medical aid, and we need to be feeding these hospitals in a way that they would never have conceived they needed, and in a way that some of the aid agencies don't truly recognize. They tend to get and this is, from a military term, the difference between logistics pull and logistics push. And a lot of the aid agencies push. We do a pull system. We ask what they want, and then we go and get it, and then we give it to them. As opposed to saying, look, we happen to have this week, a special on what is baked beans.
Yeah.
We don't do that stuff. And so it's been very effective. And so we drown in letters of request as a consequence of the humanitarian impact that we've made. I've got requests for, can I tell you about the other 2 work streams, which might help? Road of Life is patient transfers and evacuations. We've got a thing called Heat for Health, a concept where we've taken, it's fundamentally a recycling project. We've taken old electrical water cylinders, as we would call them in our countries, that are no longer functional. And we've got a small team of fabricators in Kiev in a small workshop. They strip these things down and they rebuild them into stoves and water boilers.
Wow.
We've produced over 5,000 of those. And of course, with the continued attacks on water and power infrastructure, and this year is just off the scale, by the way, it's phenomenal. We are constantly being asked for these very lightweight, easily movable,
cheap,
somewhat agricultural looking, I have to say, stoves, water boilers, because they can be fed anything, ideally wood, but if you haven't got access to wood, you can put rubbish of any sort, light it up, and you've got a source of heat and a source of cooking. And there's 2 double units together, where the water tank, say a 150, 200 litre tank, sits on top of the bottom tank, which is fundamentally the fire, if you will, or the heating source, with a tap on them, and then you've got access to hot water. In some cases, this is all these families have had for all winter. And so, these areas are pretty brutal. And this is a front line of over, 1,200 kilometres. And we learned very quickly, when I say we, I mean me, that you can't be all things to all people as much as you want to, and you don't help anyone. And this comes back to, putting your own oxygen mask on before you try and help anybody else. And there was a point where I had to stop and say, what are we going to do here? Because we can't continue to run at this pace and, probably let everybody down, as opposed to making an effective and impactful humanitarian impact. And so as a consequence of that, we have these 3 work streams: Road of Life, evacs, hospital transfers, Heat for Health, this fabrication of heat, of stoves and water boilers, and then general medical aid. And that does come in the form of bringing ambulances in and giving them away to bona fide hospitals and medical units, and sourcing tons and tons of medical aid from in and around the local region, so we don't incur big logistics costs with having to fly stuff in containers from New Zealand or Australia, which I have done, but I won't do anymore because I can get it all here and mostly for free.
Yeah.
Mostly.
Crazy. Yeah. So basically, KiwiCare does, like I say, three things. You provide medical evac assistance for anyone, which basically means your ambulances and your drivers will find people either in hospitals that need to move between hospitals or from their homes to the hospital. And then you'll be providing actually aid and supplies to the medical caretakers as well. And then these heaters, you're just, distributing these great little heaters all around wherever they're needed. Wow.
Yeah. And if you look at if your listeners look at the KiwiCare website or my Facebook page, whatever, you'll see these, and some will laugh and say, "Oh my goodness, these things are terrible. They're very agricultural looking things," but we can whack them up for $200 Kiwi dollars.
Yeah.
And get and distribute them, by the way. So this is a really cost-effective way of delivering a life-saving capability.
So on this show, we always like guests to come on and really give us a sense of what a particular story, what it's like behind the scenes. Tell us, is there an event or an experience or something from what you've described that really kind of gives us a picture of what one of these missions looks like?
Well, look, I can. I mean, everything's changed and evolved. There's so many stories, and we've had some big frights as well, because we've operated, close right up front to a degree. In the older days before Bakhmut fell, we used to work there. We delivered humanitarian and mostly medical aid to the children's hospital there on a number of occasions.
Jeez.
But I guess the one story, and apropos our past conversation, that I can reflect on, that's still very clear really, is we were in Vachansk, and at one stage in Vachansk, about 1,000 meters, so 1 kilometer from the Russian border. Vachansk, like Bakhmut, has now fallen, and we were there in October 2022, and we were doing a whole range of things. We were taking medical and humanitarian aid, and probably curious to some of your listeners, also helping out with the transportation of animals. We don't do that anymore, but the Ukrainians, like Kiwis and Aussies, love their animals. We're dog nuts and cat nuts, and we just love them so much. They're part of the family.
It's not just pets. Is it pets or livestock or all animals?
No,
is it
pets? Mostly, because when the initial withdrawal happened in February 2022, people had to go so quickly. They left their dogs and cats behind, their fur babies.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can imagine it. It's tragic. And I still get messages today asking if I'm going to be in a certain area, can I look for this dog? And I get a photo of a dog.
Oh my
I mean, it's
God.
heartbreak.
I mean, just for people that may obviously aware of the Ukraine war, but a place like Bakhmut, for example, I know it's I don't know how far away Verchansk is from it, but just as context, I think it was like 70,000 people lived there sort of before the war. And then after the huge, because it's a huge battleground between the two forces. And I think it dropped to like 500 people. So many people either were killed or evacuated.
Absolutely. I think it might be more than 70,000 because it had universities and it was a university
God.
city and what have you. But I don't really know that.
Yeah.
But yes, it was a major city,
Yeah.
of course. And of course, around Bakhmut with the salt mines, Solidar and what have you, and a key
Big place.
industrial region of that wider Donetsk, Donbass area, as it's called.
So
it's tragic. The whole thing is tragic.
So you and your team had kind of gone, this is literally the front lines, literally, border with Russia.
Vachansk was pretty sketchy in those days, and as I say, it's now fallen completely and mostly destroyed from the photos that I've seen anyway.
Wow.
I was with an international team, and again, you'll see I've got some filming there in Vachansk about what we're doing and what have you. But on the way back, I was still quite heavy in the van because I had some rescue equipment and what have you. And the road was so bad, I mean, almost unpassable.
Jeez.
And instead of being at 5 kilometers an hour or 10 kilometers and dodging potholes the size of, small craters, the team decided to go off road. And there were these formed roads on the dirt track, but I was too heavy for it. And I said to them, look, I'm struggling with this and I need to get up back onto this track, this road, such that it was. Just as I was thinking that, the van got really stuck. And unfortunately, I wasn't quick enough to try and reverse out of it. we had radios, and I was saying to them, look, I'm stuck. Can you come back and tow me out? And they were saying, we'll be back in a minute, back in a minute. And the radio started crackling and the voices started fading, and then they were gone. And I knew they were coming back.
But they
And
didn't
I'm
come
there
back.
with two.
But why wouldn't they come back? Just because they're like, we've got to go, kind of thing.
They were really scared. It was it was very sketchy, to say the least, to be honest. And I had two very elderly people sitting up front with me, neither of whom could speak a word of English. And, trying to explain to them, and I couldn't get a signal, so I couldn't really use, some of the apps that we might have today. Anyway, the day turned to night, and it was a very, very black night. There's photos of this van that we call Black Betty, who was this particular one. I've got them on Facebook, but it was a dark, heavy night, and in the near distance there were big orange flashes, and you could hear bangs, and And then I thought, goodness me, what am I going to do here? Because we're in the middle of nowhere. These two people are too old to leave and tab out anywhere. There was something of a bush line about, I could see previously, had seen about maybe 3-4 kilometres away. And I did wonder about at least going and getting into the bushes. And I said to them, look, through holding up a toilet roll, you probably want to go to the toilet. And they dutifully took it and disappeared into the darkness, came back and then sat stoically in the van, looking straight through the front windscreen without saying a word to me, because they couldn't, or each other. It was extraordinary. And then out of the distance came these dull lights looming. And I thought, okay, this is going to be either a huge relief or a major problem. And it was a line call as to whether they were Russian or Ukrainian coming. But it was an incredible Ukrainian team who were aghast that we were there. Couldn't believe it, actually. Put a tow up on the back of Black Betty, towed us backwards, and as a consequence of that, the whole front of the van, this is a VW Crafter, was ripped off. And there's photos of that on... and so we threw the front, then they had to get out and literally cut the remains because it was hanging by plastic, if you can imagine it. They cut that off. We threw that in the back, and they towed me back onto the road, and then escorted me probably about 10 Ks because they were very worried. And they knew they were talking to the elderly couple who had explained we were coming from Volchansk. And long story short, after lots of negotiations, getting back to Kharkiv at about 3:30 that morning, when curfew, by the way, I think if my memory serves me, in 2022 was 8 o'clock at night, so we are way out of bounds. Block post after block post trying to explain to the soldiers and the police why on earth a New Zealander with two elderly Ukrainians is out in the wee hours when I should be tucked up in bed. So
God.
that was the beginning of really my change of attitude to working with international teams.
Yep.
And as we have talked previously, we now work with these incredible Ukrainian NGOs, professional, our planning processes are good, our safety protocols are good, and we have great mission effect, which is to say humanitarian impact.
That is absolutely great. I mean, you guys you're doing what KiwiCare does, which is, one of your pillars is to go out there and do evacuations. So you guys had gone literally into the frontline areas. You're a kilometre from the Russian border, and you were helping, using your vehicles to get people, to get pets and animals out of the danger zone because there was a risk of essentially Russian forces coming through that area. And what would happen? And you said that light coming towards you down the road at night. I mean, it must have been going through your mind, if that is a Russian vehicle with Russian forces in it, what would have likely happened to you and your passengers?
Well, we would have been taken prisoner. What would have happened next? There's horrific stories about, people, including volunteers, who have been taken prisoner and accused of being spies and all sorts of stuff that goes on once you end up in the hands of the Russians. But it's a brutal, it's a one-way ticket, really.
Oh my God, that is unbelievable. So the other parts of your team were, as you say, the international. They're part of your team, and they're like, it's not. We had to leave you behind.
Well, they had gone. And that, as I said, was the beginning of my realization that there's no good will come from this.
Did you catch up with them later and have words with them?
We had a quick word, not very much, to be honest. There wasn't very much to say. They were very sheepish. But by then I had decided, and we had one more big mission in Bakhmut. And then I was home after that. Yeah. So, and that was a very, tricky operation itself. Getting into Bakhmut in those days, this is now late, I think November or mid-November, 2022. And then when I went home after that for about 6 months or so to do fundraising speeches and what have you, mostly around New Zealand, I had then decided that we need to partner with bona fide Ukrainian NGOs and have much better planning processes.
And that stoicism of the couple that you were, you're evacuating out of there, like, is that something that is really sort of like, symbolic or sort of uniform across a lot of the Ukrainians that you've dealt with in that region?
It is, Chris, actually. The stoicism, the resilience, the strength of the Ukrainian people is something the world can look at in awe in the circumstances of what they've had to deal with. They've been outgunned, they've been outnumbered in every regard. And while they have had good support, particularly from Europe and previously from the US, they don't have that US support today. And as we're talking here right now, we know that Trump has, not unexpectedly, done a complete flip-flop on the Tomahawks.
Yeah.
And more than that is after the call with Putin, saying that maybe Ukraine should just give up the ghost now, literally, and give away all of the Donbass, which is one of the ceasefire requirements that Russia have got, which is just an inconceivable outcome given what they've been through these past nearly 4 years.
Yes, I was sitting here in October 2025, as it were, and we're still years into the conflict. I mean, an experience like that you've had, like, as you said, it could have gone really badly. And doing missions nowadays, does that experience still come up in your head, or is it's just par for the course?
Yeah, from a planning point of view, it does now. Of course, the dynamics are very different. There were not the amount of drones by any measure back then. So the planning processes are now around drone proliferation and what we can do to defend or at least identify against that. But also, yes, we use much better planning processes. We work with the military a lot more closely in terms of what is happening, the situational awareness in and around the area. And there have been a number of occasions when we've been going to a point to either do evacuations or deliver medical aid, and the military have called and said, "Don't come. It's just too hot." And so we don't, we're not configured in any respect for that. None of us are pretending to be soldiers, even though some of us might have had a background previously. But no one's pretending to be anything other than what we are.
I'd love to ask you, because these regions that you guys have operated in, whether you can go there or not at the moment, but they are literally littered with mines. And I'm just curious, the way that you deal with the Russian, you go to a particular region, you deal with the Russian forces and the military, and do you, because I know that from experience doing a project recently about mine action and stuff and the situation in Ukraine, it's very hard to know where minefields are. And are you cognizant of that when you're, trudging through a demolished village, trying to look for pets and people to rescue?
Yeah, very. So we don't go off-road for that reason, particularly, although we were in the Vachansk story that I've just told, very much off-road. But no, we tend to stay on the beaten track, that which is very worn and very worn previously. And so, we're very cautious of mines. It's probably one of the most mined areas in the world today. Yeah. And, the problem with mines, of course, as the winter comes, and particularly if they're in muddy areas, if there is ground movement, the mines move too. Yeah. So even if they are marked, and I very much doubt that, despite the conventions which require that they should be marked, I very much doubt they would have moved anyway in some cases. I mean, Ukraine is basically as flat as a pancake. So, it's where mines are put on slopes, and those slopes subside a bit. That's where the real danger is. But yes, look, there's incredible people, including New Zealanders and Australians, here doing big demining projects, and that will last for years to come.
Yeah, it is a travesty. I mean, I know the Russians literally fly over Ukraine and drop these little they butterfly mines that are sort of small charges. They're not everyone's probably imagining a circular, sort of cylindrical kind of thing, but these butterfly mines are designed like, maple leaves or something, and they just flutter down to the ground, and they're green, and you just can't see them.
All sorts though, Chris, not just those, but yes,
many different types.
And again, you worry about animals and children, and when the war ends, people running through the bush, as they love to do, the Ukrainians. They're a very outdoorsy folk, so yeah.
Oh my God, that's absolutely crazy what you guys are doing over there. And I'm just glad. I mean, I guess as a final question on that, I'd love to know when you've rescued a dog or a cat or something like that, and you've brought it back to the owner, wherever they might be. What are the sort of faces like when they're reunited with a loved
Well,
pet
look,
like that?
sadly, we very rarely brought one back to owners.
Oh, really?
We've normally taken them back to rescue centres,
Yeah,
which, they do their best, but they can be,
that's
pretty
tough.
awful. Two occasions we have found owners for sure. I mean, this is not core business. This is very much an adjunct to what we do. But yeah, there are photos of me on Facebook with dogs in the cab of our vehicles where we've just, and I still carry a 20 kg bag of dog food around because they have now packed up in the gas stations,
Mhm.
which for those that know Ukraine will know that the gas stations are huge and they've got incredible cafes or restaurants attached to them. And so the dogs all hang around there, and we do our best to feed them as much as you can. If you're an animal lover like I am, I'm just hopeless with dogs. If I can get
Adopt
to
them
scrunch
all.
a dog once or twice a day, I'm pretty happy actually. And so we do feed them. So I do carry a big bag of dog food around with me.
That's fantastic. I mean,
Like, sounds like the cottage idiot, I know, but
not at all.
things you do under these
I
circumstances.
mean, being someone on the ground and with a company or with an organization or a unit that is working more efficiently, what is the solution?
Well, I think let's take it away from aid agencies and put it into a military context. Um, Doing the things that we've always done in a military context, in light of what has happened in the Ukraine war, would be very foolhardy and in many cases suicidal. And the Russians are they're absolutely experiencing that. Full frontal assaults. You can't make if people are unaware, I ask you to ask your listeners to Google this and try and find bona fide sources of information. But full frontal assaults on trail bikes, just to try and cover the ground quickly.
So,
And so as a consequence, under the tree lines where the Ukrainians have got defensive positions, and just ahead of that, there's trail bikes everywhere, and dead Russians, of course.
you've got Russian soldiers on dirt bikes charging the Ukrainian
Yep.
front lines.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, you cannot make this stuff up. It's just
Oh my
quite
God.
extraordinary. So, and then all the frontline guys would talk about the things they've seen are just quite extraordinary. Full frontal assaults with Russian troops sitting on the armored vehicles on top. I mean, you never do that. Never ever do that. I mean, you dismount and the armored vehicles give you fire support and all it. The tactics are quite extraordinary. But more than that, what we've seen with drones is a very, very different type of warfare. It's a thing that we aren't used to at all. There is nowhere to hide under any circumstances. That the drones can go up in swarms and do, by the way. And you can have FPV drones, observation drones, all interconnected and all working. And nowadays with AI coming along, there's just the speed of the speed within the battlefield, the speed of observation, of decision making, target acquisition, and targeting is so fast that it's impossible to keep up with. And we're seeing a $450 drone taking out a $45 million tank. So and even if it doesn't take it out in one hit, it could disable it. So it's immobile, and then two or three others come, and that's the end of the tank. So everything has changed, Chris. If I then bring that into the humanitarian world that we are living in, everything's changed for us as well. Humanitarian aid workers are not protected in any regard. Putting a red cross, or in our case a yellow cross, or writing on the roofs of something, we are humanitarian aid workers. That's just a target. And so what does it mean? I guess I've got empathy for the big aid agencies who have stalled. Many have stalled, by the way. They will argue, if they're hearing this, they haven't stalled at all. But all I'm saying is that prove to me you haven't, because I know where we are and you're not there. That's all I'll say. But we're still going through a reconfiguration of what to do exactly to manage the process. And part of this is having a good electronic warfare capability, which is anti-drone, things called REBs, for example. The other part of it that I think we're going to have to look at, if we can find a way, is we need hardened vehicles. We could never afford to acquire or run armor, and I'm talking about armored ambulances now. We, like in the old days, for the older listeners, the M113 class of vehicle, the APC, had an armored ambulance variant. While that would be amazing, we couldn't afford to run it, not for a second. The hardened vehicles we are looking at, and which is to say that they've got, plates all around them. We'd need a good roof plate. We'd need very, very good, to use an old term, bulletproof glass, but a ballistic glass capability, and something under the even under the body of the car, so because drones could get under. I'm not worried about running over mines for us so much, but drones can get under cars and explode from underneath. And of course, things like run flat tires. All these things take a massive amount of money, which is then being redirected into self-protection, which is going to become very necessary, as opposed to looking after those who are most vulnerable. And it's a very tricky situation.
If I had to ask you how much, let's say hypothetically you get given $1 million, how much of that money is spent on protecting the humanitarian aid and how much is actually spent on providing it?
Well, that's a very good question. So if you'd asked me a year ago or less, I would have said I will turn that $1 million into $8 million of humanitarian impact somehow. And we've got this. We can measure this really accurately today. Through the 3 work streams, we know exactly how many people we will save, the quality of life years that we will give to them, which is a bona fide way of measuring humanitarian impact. How we reduce the stress on the health system, because people aren't either getting sick or they're not getting injured, or as a consequence of what we're doing, and reducing stress on the health system. It has a huge financial impact. If people aren't, because they've got warmth, because they've got access to hot water, and because they can cook a decent meal, means they're not presenting at hospital, means that those that are in hospital are those that really need to be there. And so it goes. So we know exactly how to measure this. The question, though, and it's a very good question, is what are we going to now spend on? I would think we would have to allocate 20% of that today, that $1 million, because, and I'm talking of about, electronic warfare. Sorry, let's say 10% for now, because if I jumped into my mind around having hardened vehicles, it would be a lot more than that. But it would be certainly 10% of that 1 million to put some sort of ribs in all our ambulances, so at least the guys can identify if there's a drone in the air. I have to say, and those that have a really good understanding about this might argue, but it does remind me a little bit about in our country is buying a radar detector. When the cops, so you can get ahead of the cops, so you're speeding and your radar detector goes off, you slam your foot on the brakes and you don't get a ticket, and then the cops get something better, and then you've got to get something better, and so you're in this constant cycle, right, of a technological game with the New Zealand and Australian traffic police, which I've never done personally, but I'm just using it as an example. And I've said to people that really know this guy, I said, are we in this cycle? They said, quite possibly we are. I said, well, we can't afford to play this game, man. We need something which is going to give us the best bang for buck, so we can put all the rest of the bucks into humanitarian aid. And so we're still very undecided as to what to do. But if we do go down the hardened vehicle route for ambulances and what have you, that's a very expensive game to play.
So you've got teams out there right now that are driving ambulances and driving vehicles, moving aid around the country into, the front lines, the very front lines of things. And they are literally targets for drones.
Absolutely, they are. We've lost 2 ambulances. They do wear helmets, and we've got very good, personal protection, body armor, and what have you. The only reason the driver is alive is that the Russian drone operator considered it naturally to be a left-hand drive vehicle. He was in an Aussie ambulance.
Wow.
So and I've got footage of the drone. Curiously, we discovered that they were playing it on various Telegram channels, and I've now seen that drone come from the high rear of the ambulance, come down and do a hard right-hand turn to try and hit the left-hand side of the vehicle, which it did, and the driver, thankfully, was sitting on the right-hand side.
That is extraordinary. That is absolutely extraordinary. So they were targeting the driver, but just by sheer luck.
Absolutely, to kill the driver. And the other one was an attack on the back of the ambulance to kill who was ever in the back. And you'd assume it was a patient and maybe a nurse and possibly a doctor. So yeah.
So you've got people literally risking that. You and your colleagues are risking your lives. That's not
Yep.
even an
I mean, I've
exaggeration.
got a
But
good answer if you're going to ask why, and I don't have a very good answer for this. I
I mean, why? But also, again, it's kind of around about what does it take to do this kind of work?
Well, look, fundamentally back to where it started. I did an interview on Radio New Zealand when they said why. This is back in
Yeah.
March, April 2022, and I said because hand on heart, I believe then, and this has absolutely been borne out to be true, that this is the war that's going to change world order, in the sense that we are going to see alliances that are unusual, and we've seen that. We've now seen all these alliances: North Korea and Russia, North Koreans over here fighting and what have you. And we're going to see a very different world as a consequence of this war. This is a war that will have a huge impact on the rest of the world, not just Ukraine and Russia, and not just Europe, but everywhere. We've certainly seen that. Look, I'd go as far as to say it's been augmented by Trump 2.0, but pushing that aside, it was going to happen anyway. And we are seeing this change of world order. We are seeing countries, European countries particularly, spending, if you'd said to them 3-4 years ago, you'll be spending something like 5% of GDP on defense, they would have laughed. And that's exactly what they're doing. Spain is resisting, and for good reason, by the way. They've got some other issues that they need to contend with, and others are getting there. Poland have gone all out. They may be above 5%. Germany are probably going to get back up there again. And so, here we are in a very different changed environment. We are committed donkey deep now, and we can't stop. I mean, there are times when I do wonder what the hell I'm doing here, but I know that from the lives we've saved, and they're thousands now, the impact that we're making, and I know that the Ukrainian NGOs that we support, and we do support them financially, they'd stop. If kiwikis stopped, they'd stop. And so I have got to keep going. And we will go to the bitter end.
You feel the real weight of responsibility now,
I do now. Yeah.
It must be
I feel
extraordinary.
a huge responsibility for having started something and we're one of the few that are left. If you talk to the volunteer organizations, the vast majority have gone. And for good reason, some they just run out of money, and others have had to go and get jobs, and these are bona fide real reasons, But I do, given what we've created, feel a huge responsibility to continue supporting our Ukrainian NGOs and also giving them, my experience, because things have changed and I don't want anybody to get killed. No one has yet. That's worked for Kiwi Care. We've had a very serious injury, of course. And we will do our best to keep people alive while they're doing this incredible work.
Amazing. And just wrapping things up, I mean, as this show is kind of about extraordinary careers and those experiences that come along with it, and humanitarianism is an odd one because it's not a career as such. It's a calling, or people get called to it. You don't make money. Let's say a lot of these people are volunteers. They're all volunteers, And I always like at the end for people like yourselves to offer advice for anyone who wants to follow in your footsteps. I mean, for anyone listening that has kind of always been like, I really feel like I want to do something, whether it's in Ukraine or it could be a crisis in their own countries. Have you got any words for advice of people that want to sort of take up humanitarianism?
Sure. I think you've got to do it for the right reasons, and you've got to do it for the people that are in the areas that you're going to operate, as opposed for you to get something out of it. It is very rewarding. It's extremely hard work, as I've discovered. I mean, I've aged. I'm not young anyway,
yeah, you're looking at 30, yeah.
But I've certainly aged. And, it's really about, I keep using this term, humanitarian impact, but what is the biggest impact you can make for, bang for buck, to use a silly term, where you're really producing something which is of huge value and will save lives for those, and it's about, for those people who are most vulnerable, but it's about working in the right environment where you've got good strategic thinkers, people that have got a great knowledge and capability of the area in which you're going to work. Partnerships with the locals is a critical part of it, absolutely critical. and developing relationships as far and as wide as you possibly can. And so I will say that we must, all of us, look after our own mental health as best we can. And part of that is I think getting up and making a really big contribution, if I can go as far as to say that. And by that I mean, there's nothing worse than sitting back thinking I should be doing this, but I can't, making that big contribution and then making sure that you look after yourself and try and get some downtime as much as possible. I mean, the problem with this environment, Chris, even in Kiev, as you know, is that if you do withdraw to Kiev, you still get smacked with monotonous regularity with Shahed drones and ballistic missiles.
Yeah.
And so, it's not exactly a restful environment.
I can imagine. But you're doing good. You're making an impact on people's lives, which, is moving the needle, as they say, in the right way.
Well, thank you, Chris. And can I just say to your listeners from all over the world, but I just want to thank the Kiwis and the Aussies, just the most incredible support. The Americans have been amazing, so have Canadians and many European nations. And, the lifeblood of what we do is funds. I have to say, we don't need containers of old clothes again, please, but we do need funds. And, and we will continue to deliver on that 1-to-8 ratio or more if we can. If that changes, I'll be disappointed. But if it does change, it'll be because of a protective element that we're spending money on, and not because we're staying in 6-star hotels.
I mean, fantastic. I mean, just on that note, I mean, where can people find out more about Kiwi Care and all the work that you guys do?
Sure. Thank you. Well, we have a website. It's kiwicareukraine.co.nz, or for the Americans, NZ. Facebook. We've got in New Zealand, there's a wonderful crowdsourcing entity called Give a Little. And we've got a page on Give a Little that's getting close to $800,000, which has been incredible.
Wow.
It's one aspect of our fundraising,
Yeah.
that we do. Not the main, by the way, but it's incredible. But it's very visual, and some people like to make a note on it and say something about Ukraine and give support to Ukraine. And that's been great. So Give a Little is probably the easiest in New Zealand thing to go, and it's Kiwi Care on Give a Little.
Great. And anyone in the world can go there as well. I'm sure Americans and
Yeah,
Brits
absolutely.
can go and
For
give a
sure.
little,
For sure. Or direct to our donate button on our website.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Lovely. Tenby, listen, thank you so much for all the work that you do in Ukraine. And I wish you guys all the best, and I hope your team stays safe. And as I said, I hope everything comes to a peaceful resolution soon.
Thank you very much, Chris. And I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. And I wish you all the best with your wonderful podcast.
All right. Thanks, mate. See you soon.
Thanks, buddy. Go
Bye.
well. Take care. Bye-bye.
And that is a wrap on this week's episode. A huge thanks again to Tenby for sharing he and his team's remarkable work in Ukraine. And a big thanks to you all as well for listening and watching. If you'd like to learn more about Tenby's work, how to support Kiwi Care, or follow the team's updates in Ukraine, you can visit their website, kiwicareukraine.co.nz. That's care with a K. Or you can find all the links in the show notes below and over on our website, noordinarymonday.com. And as always, you can find extra clips, visuals, and behind the scenes bits from this episode across our socials, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and of course the No Ordinary Monday community group on Facebook, where you can jump into the conversation, ask questions, share ideas, and just generally be part of the NOM crew. Okay, so this week we don't have any listener work stories, but if you have a story you'd like me to feature on the show, head over to the website and click the listener story page, or you can just email me, hello, HELLO, at noordinarymonday.com. Alrighty, so where are we going next week? We are going to dive into the psychological trenches with former Secret Service agent Brad Beeler. From presidential protection to high-stakes interrogations, Brad has spent his career hunting deception, leading major criminal investigations, exposing fraud, and running a record-breaking number of polygraph tests. He reveals what really happens behind closed doors when the mission is simple: find the truth. Brad even uses his interrogation skills on me in a game of 2 truths and a lie. So tune in next week to find out if he catches me out. If today's episode made your Monday just a little bit better, click 5 stars and share the show with someone who would love it. It seems small, but it makes all the difference. It really helps us grow and reach new listeners and keep bringing you the most extraordinary guests that we can find. This show is independently produced, hosted, and edited by me, Chris Barron. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great Monday, everyone, and we will see you next week.